The Canon EOS 3 is Canon's latest, well, honestly, it's a flagship camera. The EOS R3 is better in most ways than the Canon EOS R1. Let's take a look at some of the specifications here. Now, you'll remember that Canon made a development announcement back in April, and it seemed like it's an excellent camera for photojournalists, but if you're a video person, maybe not. Well, we're going to get to the video specs shortly, but the Canon R3 is using a 24.1 megapixel back illuminated sensor, stacked sensor, and it's using that same Digic X processor found in the R5, 6, and 1DX Mark III. It does have 8 stops of IBIS, and it does shoot continuous blackout-free shooting. But the one thing that I'm really excited about here is that this camera has made some significant improvements to, well, the autofocus system. Now let's take a look at the specs here. The autofocus system received several upgrades. Now it is dual pixel 2, same as in the R5, but it now does, over the entire coverage area, 1056 autofocus points. And of course, it has that nifty new feature found, well, nifty, everything old is new again, feature found in the EOS 3 eyeball controlled or eye controlled autofocus, meaning that whatever you look at becomes the focus point. And it actually works quite well. I've watched several videos from Gordon Lang to Fronos, and this looks like it works quite well. But wait, there's more. Like the R5 and the R6, we have eye-controlled autofocus for humans, as well as head and subject detection. We have eye-controlled autofocus for birds, but it also works well for dogs, cats, and other animals. I've even had it work on insects. So anything with large eyes, it seems to do well in. But, and this is really awesome here, do you like cars? Do you like racing across the land? And do you like to be out there with your friends shooting these cars? I've never seen so many gratuitous car shots of cars spinning their tires, of cars racing around inanimate objects, chasing through the desert, racing with buddies around a track until the R3 came out. And that's because, as you can see here, the Canon EOS R3 does a really good job of tracking cars, and it'll do it in one of two ways. It'll track the car, but if it detects a helmet, well, it's going to lock onto that. So I'm really quite impressed with some of the video some of the features like autofocus that will aid in the video. But this is where I want to really go back and take a look at. Yes, it's got a 5.76 million .EVF. Sure, that's great. It's got an optical viewfinder simulation. But let's take a look at these video specs here. 6K, 60 frames per second, raw. And it can do 4K oversampled. It can do 6K oversampled 4K, and it can do it at 60 frames per second. The R5, well, it can do 8K oversampled 4K. It can only do it up to 30 frames per second. So if your name's Tony Northrup, and I know you're watching, you can do 4K 60 on the R3 and get that super detailed resolution. And what we've seen with the R5, it's actually more detailed than the A7S III if you're in that 8K oversampled mode. But wait, there's more. So 6K 12-bit raw DCI, 24 to 60 frames per second, but it also does 120 frames per second in 4K. And they bumped it up to 120 frames per second in 1080 as well. No extra love there. And unlike the C70, once again, Canon decided that we don't need sound. There's no way we're going to take that slow motion clip and speed it up now, is there? Now there's other things too. There's it has Canon Log 3, BT709, BT2020, and Cinema Gamut, and it's actually quite light. It weighs just about a kilogram or 2.2 pounds. But, and this is, I know you've all been asking for this. If you haven't watched the news, you've probably been working really hard, so I know what you're asking. I know what you're thinking. Does it have that 30-minute record limit? Well, Canon still in their infinite wisdom decided to put a record limit in it. But it's 6 hours. I don't get that. Well, hold on, James.
That is awesome.
I don't know anybody that's going to record for 6 hours internally in 6K that they're going to have enough storage to do that. Usually you're going to store it after about an hour or two. You're recording to some sort of external device. But wait, I know what you're thinking. Yeah, it's probably 1080, right? or that standard 4K, which is line skipped. Nope. That's right. Our friend, Gordon Lang, who I'm trying to get on this channel for an interview, did a test. 6K, 25 frames per second. He went the whole 6 hours, and he shows it on screen. And you know what? There was no overheat warning. So if you're that guy who commented on my website saying, yeah, but it's still 6 hours, just press and stop the record button. I mean, what are you doing recording for 6 hours? So I've been talking for too much time now, like 10 minutes, and I want to turn it over to our first guest, Magnus. Magnus, what do you think of the R3?
Honestly, I think that this camera is really designed for professional photographers for like sports. And on the video side in itself, I was impressed with a lot of the features, especially the 6K raw recording up to 60 frames per second. I did not expect that. But the feature that impressed me the most was honestly removing that 30-minute time limit. That not only impressed me the most, but it also disappointed me, because that's something that should have been in Canon cameras for a long time. So exciting camera. I love the fact that it can do 60 frames per second in 6K. I mean, amazing. Yeah. But here's to the future of Canon, and hopefully a firmware update for the R5 and R6.
Okay, James, do you think Canon's going to show the love and say, hey, R5 owners, you only spent $4,000. Here's the record limit removed?
Yes. Short answer. Yes. I'll make my bold prediction statement right here and right now. I'll put money on it. They're going to remove the 30-minute record limit in the R5. At the very least. Maybe I'm not sure about the R6, but they'll definitely do it for the R5. I hope they will do it for the R6 as well. It's just a matter. I just think they're going to wait until after the R3 is out. It's out in the wilds. They'll do like close to what Sony did with the A7S3 and the FX3, whereas the FX3 had S-Cinetone when it came out, and then after it came out, they released a firmware for the A7S3 to get S-Cinetone. But to me, I think it's a foregone conclusion. Because there's no argument, there's no logical argument outside of just trying to just give Casey a reason to throw the hammer at him.
Wait, I see it. Okay, I have to interrupt.
There's no reason. You got the same process because you got the same processor.
I'm out of here. I just, you know what Robert just reminded me, and I had this written down, but I'm wearing Canon glasses, and everything's rosy with Canon glasses.
Exactly.
For God's sake, $6,000, and we still have that micro HDMI? Really?
Yeah. No, I mean, there's still a lot of things. And I think Magnus was on the point. Look, this is Simon, me, and Magnus, we're very video-focused people.
Yeah.
But this is still a photography-first camera. Yes, I think we mentioned this last time. I still think this is the main purpose of people who getting this camera are journalists, or sports coverage people who need to quit, who are mainly there to take photos, to get the shots, need the speed, but want to quickly switch over to video to capture things. That is the primary. And then but I also think, and I mentioned this on my channel as well, on my YouTube channel, that the secondary market is all of those people who basically love the 1DX, mainly the 1DX Mark II, and some people the 1DX Mark III, but mainly that 1DX Mark II, and the 1DC, who love that form factor, but wanted the power of that video. So the Peter McKinnons, the Casey Neistats, the Creative Ryans of the world. Like I could see some of them just going in and getting this camera. I know y'all shocked about the 6K 60. I wasn't, because this clearly almost everything about it was the 1DX Mark III, only intense, like cranked up on steroids. So the 1DX Mark III had 5.5K RAW at 60 frames per second. They just added a few additional megapixels to get it to the 6K, and now we get 6K 60 frames per second. So I'm happy for it, but it's also pointing out a lot of things that I'm like, okay, you clearly could put some of this stuff in the R5. The one thing that we haven't mentioned yet, the fact that you now can do auto white balance by just taking, instead of taking a picture, going in, clicking on press white balance, find the image you want, select that, and use that as your white balance. You can now just tap and then boom. Like, it's one of the things I love about the C70. You press a button, it balances. You got something white, press the button, boom, white balance perfectly. And it's now on this camera as well. I hope that comes into the R5 as well.
You know, I kind of wish we had Conrad Barrington here, because he is a photojournalist. He's grown up in South Africa doing a lot of this. But we do have a close second. We have John Drummond. And John, the R3, I do see it. I say photojournalism, but really I personally think in this modern age that most photojournalists out there, they're not just working for a newspaper. That newspaper has a web presence. So yes, get the photos, but also get the video if you can. What do you think about this camera as somebody who's a content creator for the news media?
Well, I do see this camera as it's clearly as a professional body, but more than that, I think it's really a specialist professional's body, because you did talk about it's really geared for fast action, sports, photojournalism. I would say wildlife, but maybe big game, because the 24 megapixel sensor isn't going to be too great for birds probably, and that's one of the things I know people are carping about already. But really, I think the target audience for this camera doesn't really care about that, because, as you said, they're not shooting for big prints. They're not shooting to do a lot of cropping. They're probably going to be shooting a JPEG, zip it over to their phone, send it out to their editors or whoever, right away. That's the bulk of the people who are going to be using this camera. And it's built like a tank, and yet very light. And to find that it weighs just maybe a couple of ounces more than my 5D Mark IV did is really stunning. So it definitely has a lot of things going for it. I'm personally excited about, since I am a photo first person, I'm very excited about, say, that the eye control autofocus, which does seem to work really well. It basically, what it does, for those who haven't seen the videos and such, it seems to, when you turn it on, it works with the eye control, eye detect or whatever other autofocus. But what it does is, as you're looking at a subject, it kind of puts like a kind of a pre-focus circle on it, but it doesn't actually shift the focus point to that point until you hit either your back button or your trigger, shutter button, whichever one you use to focus, and that's when the focus point jumps. But it seems to work, very well for those people who have been using it. I think that's something that could obviously that's not something that's going to be trickled down to curl bodies. That's obviously a hardware thing that has to be at some point, and maybe our R5 successor body might have that particular feature. But there's a lot of stuff in here that's really good. I mean, certainly the 30-minute recording limit, that is definitely should be uploaded as software to the R5 and R6 at the minimum. It's not a camera that I would buy just because I'm more of a generalist than a specialist. But I can certainly see people who are in the sports and photojournalism and maybe big game wildlife would be very excited about this camera, and rightly so. And it does a lot. It does a lot of things.
John, I got to ask you a question here. So this is faster. It's 30 frames per second electronic versus 20 frames on the 1DX Mark III. But the 1DX Mark III, I believe, reaches 16 frames per second mechanical, if I remember correctly. The R3 only has 12 frames per second mechanical shutter.
Yeah, that's true, but I believe it also defaults to electronic as opposed to other cameras defaulted to the mechanical. It's really designed to be used with the electronic shutter. And speaking of which, this also has a feature that I believe the Alpha 1 does also, in terms of being able to turn on an artificial shutter click sound, which makes it a lot easier to basically tell when you're shooting and when you're not. Because I was just birding the other day with my R5, and while I've gotten used to having a totally silent camera, it would be sometimes be nice to be able to have some kind of a audible feedback as well as visual to tell that you're really not shooting by mistake. Because the first couple of times I used it, I just shot off like a couple hundreds exposures without realizing it. So that's something that would be good. I mean, again, this is a very, very loaded camera.
Yeah, it certainly is. I just want to bring up a super chat from Stop the FOMO, some romantic listening to your channel while driving. So I hope it keeps you awake. I hope this is exciting enough. It's not going to put you to sleep. I want to throw this question out to you, James. I see this, honestly, I really would love to have this camera, but 7,500 Canadian, I'm not going to touch this. There's taxes on top of that. I just can't justify it. The work I do, no, but if I was video first and I still want to do some photos, would you say this would be a good camera? Or what about the C70, the Alpha 1, or the A7S3, the FX3, FX6?
I think, honestly, that should just, the cameras you just named off of, just think about it. I mean, outside of the C70, because, well, yes, you technically could take photos with it. It's not a photo camera. It is built, designed. I'm using the C70 right now. It's built, designed for video. But this Alpha 1, the A7S3, FX3, this should just tell you, like, the great time we are in right now. Just the amount of cameras that any sort of demographic you're in, whether if you are a serious professional person who takes photos, or somebody's more video-centric focus that wants to grab some quick stills while you're doing your work, or you're doing either you're a hobbyist transitioning into more of a career, or if you're somebody that's in the intermediate, there's a camera for everybody here. In terms of somebody that's just more video focused, there's still some things that, like, in terms of the C70 is about $500. As somebody who's just purely a video shooter, I still say, even though it's just a 4K camera, the C70 is a better choice. It still will have the better dynamic range. The DGO sensor just obliterates. There's literally only maybe 2 cameras under $10,000 that compete with the DGO sensor. Like, because I've gone through all of them. The sensor on that is incredible in terms of dynamic range, how much you can test, but also just more of the video-centric features.
Yeah.
The C70 has built-in NDs. The C70 has false color. The C70 has waveforms. The C70 has shutter angle. The C70 has a plethora of options. Now, I do like the fact that the R3 does have a lot of function buttons that you can map to. I do like that, but it's still a hybrid, at the end of the day, a hybrid camera. And there's always going to be limitations with a hybrid camera compared to just a true dedicated video camera. And you can get them close, and in terms of image quality, maybe close. Like, obviously, this R3 is going to have more details, being a 6K versus a 4K sensor. But just to have literally, I just need a handle, the top handle of the C70, the microphone, 2 batteries tops, and a lens, and I can shoot all day on the C70 with pretty much nothing else. But I will also say the R3 comes probably the closest of the hybrid cameras, of the R5s, the R6, A7S. It's probably the closest where you don't have to add too much in the stuff you could add. Canon already has it in terms of NDs. Canon has their variable ND adapter, so you don't have to worry about screwing things on the front. You can just use that if you want to stick to EF glass. You have you can use, obviously, something like an Atomos Ninja 5 to get different options if you don't want to deal with the HEVC codecs. But at the end of the day, to me, the C70 is a better video camera still, and it's cheaper. I would still choose that. In terms of the A7S III,
You're not going to take us through every camera, are you, James?
Yes, he
no,
is.
I'm going to stop at the A7S III.
He's just warming up.
We've only got an hour and a half left.
I was about to start taking notes.
Quick, I'm trying to be quick with all this. In terms of the A7S III, I think it's close. Obviously, the price difference is going to be the big deal.
Yeah.
If price is obviously a big deal to you, obviously the A7S III is going to be. But I also think it has. You don't have to worry about buying an external monitor or external recorder to record RAW. You got RAW right in there, so that saves you money right there. You got some amazing lenses that are coming up. Some that were even announced, even though they're on the lower end. The RF lineup is like really, really amazing. Not the G Master line is too,
Yes.
but price-wise, they're about the same as well. So I think a lot of video people are going to be interested in it, but the C70 is still the king.
Thanks a lot,
I want
James.
to add I want to just add one thing also in terms of the other thing that the R5 and the R6 were known about is rolling shutter, and the
Yeah.
R3 from the videos that I've seen is much less reduced. It's not quite as good maybe as the Alpha 1, but it's a very, very close second. So I think people who are going to be shooting electronic shutter or doing video and panning, you're not going to see like the leaning buildings and stuff the way that or the curved, the circle shaped golf club, that kind of thing. You're not going to see that in the R3. So that's a big improvement. From supposedly, even though it has the same processor, it's been programmed differently from what I think the Canon people were saying. I was watching a B&H photo live cast a couple of days ago on launch day, and they were talking about that. That supposedly it's been programmed differently that allows a faster readout. So which is critical for reducing or eliminating rolling shutter. So that's a major improvement over the other Canon models.
Yeah, it's definitely a nice camera. Now, Magnus, I want to touch on something else that also was announced. And you know what? I'm surprised I haven't heard a lot of chatter on this. So let me set up let me send the ball across the plate and I'll let you hit it. Canon also released several accessories. Now, the R3 has a new hot shoe, which allows things such as the new stereo mic to work. So it's got that digital interface. And I really like that. I really think that Sony's done a great job with the, what is it? I can't remember the name of it. It's also a microphone that sits on top, doesn't have any cords, doesn't require any batteries. But that thing is incredible with the options it gives you. Now, the Canon one looks pretty good, but it does have a battery. So there is that. And that kind of has me at $399. I'm kind of thinking maybe not. What do you think about the new hot shoe and some of the accessories and lenses that Canon released along with the R3?
As far as Canon adding that hot shoe, I think they're really taking a page off of Sony's book on this one, on the Sony's playbook. But I believe since Sony's more of a technology company, they're able to, and they develop their own sensors, and they're really in multiple types of electronics, whereas Canon seems to focus predominantly on imaging and printing. I believe that Sony is able to just in-house develop what they need to make their cameras and specifically their accessories just work with each other. They've got the teams, they've got the engineers to make it work. While Canon, of course, their engineers are amazing. The fact that the R5 unexpectedly was released with 8K last year, and now the R3 is still turning heads. These accessories people have been asking for, at least the hot shoe with the microphone. I know, like Tony Northrup, as an example, he's been saying, hey, I love my Sony because you can do this and, connect it on top rather than, plug it in on the side. So it's nice that Canon's doing it, but they still have just kind of a ways to go. And Canon has that reputation of, it seems like the competition, picks up steam and Canon lags behind. And then, especially with the R5 and R6, they kind of jumped ahead of everyone else. But the competition is quick to catch up to them.
Well, I got to say, Magnus, I think you're right there. The competition is very steep, but I think the competition right now, it's, as so many have said, it's a two-horse race. Right. We have to still wait to see what Nikon's going to do with the Z9, if Panasonic's finally going to catch up to the 20th century, do phase detect autofocus. Sorry, the 21st century. But I see this as a two-horse race between Sony and Canon. But before I close this off and go into the next one, I want to know if anybody would like to add a final point to the R3, because I know we can spend hours on the R3, but I've got about other stories to get through. So final comments. I'll give each of you 30 seconds. Let's go with you, John.
Well, like I said before, this is an outstanding camera, but it's a bit of a specialist camera. So not people who are more of a general shooter, like such as me, is not going to get as much out of it maybe as I'm currently getting out of my R5. But on the other hand, if you're shooting on the side of the NFL or the Olympics or whatever, this is the camera you want. I mean, the other thing, of course, that we didn't talk about, well, I guess we touched on it a little bit, is the glass, because Canon leads the world in terms of the mirrorless big glass. Sony is catching up. Nikon, I don't know where they are in terms of native glass for their Z mounts. So, I mean, Canon has made a major statement here, and what it really does now is set up the R1. Because if this is not their quote unquote flagship, then what the heck was the R1 going to have? That's the next big question that's going to be out there for the next 6 months or whenever until the R1 comes out.
Oh, I'm saving that story for a slow news week. All right, James?
This is officially a two camera company race between Sony and Canon, and we need to press Canon continuously to put a note to remove the 30-minute record limit in the R5 and the R6 and bring features that I think it deserves, including shutter angle, including waveforms, including an update on that white balance.
And we know they can do it. Magnus, you have the final word on the R3.
All right. If nothing else, two very important things. First, all the videos released up to this point on the R3 are pre-release. It's not actual reviews. So pay attention to the reviews. I would hold off before ordering it and making that final decision to see what flaws it might have. Second, R3 is a step in between the 1DX Mark III and the upcoming R1. So if you're unsure, perhaps you should wait off and see what the R1 has to offer.
Yeah, very good point. And if you are looking at purchasing any of the gear that we talk about in this channel, I do have a link down below to B&H where you can go and look at the specs, you can see the comments and purchase if you wish. But the R3, it was sold out the first day. If you like this video, well, stay tuned. I've got more of them coming. But keep in mind, this is a pre-recorded segment from my weekly camera news live show, which is every Friday between 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And if you like covering the news and if you would like to collaborate, well, then join me live Friday nights where you can ask questions and interact with the panelists. And panelists cover a range of the camera industry. We have photo experts and video experts. We have camera news or industry insiders. And once in a while, I have some guests from other channels such as Jordan Drake or Dan Watson. But again, thank you so much for watching The Ordinary Filmmaker. Please don't forget to punch that like and subscribe button as it really does help my channel grow. We'll see you again soon.